So good afternoon to everybody in India. I think the webinar has started. And so it gives me really great pleasure to welcome everybody on behalf of Sangat's 25 years of mental health action celebration. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Kyati Tiwari and I lead the child development group at Sangat. What was started by 5 professionals as a child development center in 1996 has evolved into India's, and if I would be a little bold in saying, probably one of the world's most innovative public health research not-for-profit organizations. This journey has led us from a very small rented 1-bedroom apartment in North Goa to having our own property in Goa, but also to thriving hubs both in Bhopal and in New Delhi. This journey and transformation has been like a young child and has had its own growing pains. We have grappled in the early days with some self-doubt on whether we were on the right path. Detractors were suspicious of our success and of this new professional model of a not-for-profit research organization. But our belief in ourselves grew, particularly with the support from local and international funding organizations, but mostly from the feedback from the communities with which we worked. Work which had initially been focused really on young children expanded to include the mental health and well-being of adolescents, of adults, and the elderly. Let me reveal some of what I feel are the secrets of our success. First, our firm belief in collaboration, whether with other not-for-profits, governmental departments, national or international colleagues, but primarily to listen to the communities of self-advocates and caregivers that we work with. Second, I suspect our honesty in the face of challenges. So I think we do recognize that we often stumble, but we try to get up and we try again and again to innovate. But most importantly, I think it's our abiding sense of social justice, that everyone, everywhere, regardless of who they are, must have access to the best evidence-informed treatments for them to thrive. Along the way, we've received a number of recognitions. One of the first ones we got was from the MacArthur Foundation's International Prize for Creative and Effective Institutions in 2008. This was followed by the Blessed Mother Teresa Award given to us by the government of Goa in 2011. And then we had also been judged as India's public health champion in 2016 by the WHO. There are many people who make Sangat. There are some people like me who may sit in the spotlight, but I really want to acknowledge the many, many people who are the heart and soul of this organization. There are colleagues who keep the offices spotless for our arrival the next day. There are the drivers who ferry us on the roller coaster of Indian roads. Our administrative and financial staff who pull us up and show us the relevant rules when we are overstepping policies. Our teams who conduct the work on the ground. Our institutional review board, which ensures that we are accountable to the highest standards of research. Our general body who quietly but effectively supports the work we do. Our executive council who dare to become rather unpopular while drafting new policies and rules. Our managing committee members who have steered our vision over the last 25 years, some of which have certainly been bumpy. And of course, our diverse funders, whether individual donors or funding organizations who have trusted us in the work that we do. And so I just want to really a warm welcome to everybody who's on board and online. Over this half day, we invite you to hear from experts working in the areas of child development, in anti-stigma campaigning for mental health, enabling mental health support in the communities, and reducing substance and alcohol addictions. You will also hear from civil society members and activists and policymakers who have dedicated their life to advocate for the right to mental health care and support for all. Let me now maybe put on my hat as the moderator for the first panel. This will be themed around Sangat's work with young children and their families, which was formalized into the Child Development Group in 2018. My colleagues have been pushing the envelope in designing interventions which would allow young children to flourish. Whether this is thinking about developing intervention material for Anganwadi workers to support development across the early years, in designing and training supervision methodologies to help ASHA workers deliver an intervention for autism, or designing innovative digital technologies to detect and identify children who may be struggling with their development, and the team in Goa, which has been really working hard to foster inclusion within mainstream schools. I would like to let a short film first speak about our vision in the Child Development Center. Let me hand that across to Shweta and the team. Yeah, here we are.
And its work child development and family guidance, child development and family guidance center in Goa, providing a range of specialized services.
Can you just pause that full screen, and please? Thank you. Thank you.
Sangat began its work with the first multidisciplinary child development and family guidance center in Goa, providing a range of specialized services for children and their families. We cater to the needs of children with developmental disabilities and those who experienced emotional health, behavioral and academic challenges. The vision for our child development work is driven by a firm belief that every child is most important. We acknowledge that parents are an important resource to reach children, and schools are an important platform to touch lives of children and their families. So keeping our vision, our values, our principles in mind, our interventions seek to empower parents through evidence-based treatments for their children and empower schools to create enabling and inclusive environments where children can learn and thrive.
Thank you all. I do hope that you enjoyed that short clip. Our first panel is titled Supporting Families and Children and features brief presentations by collaborators, a parent advocate, and representatives from the school in Goa that has successfully integrated inclusive approaches into their curriculum. As we commence, I will introduce each panelist before they speak. I would definitely like to apologize in advance because many of our speakers have rather accomplished and long CVs, but I will be very brief in my introductions. We will, however, place a more detailed bio for them in the chat box. We will also have a short moderated discussion after this panel, so do post any questions in the Q&A box. So really, to introduce our first speaker is going to be Kyati Tiwari. She works as a nutritional specialist at the UNICEF Hyderabad field office and has been there since December 2016. This particular office caters to Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and Karnataka. Kyati has been instrumental in supporting Sangat in the Aspire project, which has created audiovisual intervention content to support families with messaging around the nurturing care framework. The aim is really to integrate this new intervention with minimal impact on time and pressure into the work of the Anganwadi worker. Kyati, please, can I welcome you to speak?
Thank you so much, Gauri, for the introduction, and many congratulations on the 25 excellent years of operating. Is this the cue for me to put on my presentation and start? All right.
Yes, please.
If you can just confirm if you're able to see my screen.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right, great. So just in interest of the network connectivity, I'll turn off my video while I'm presenting. I'll turn it on when we are having discussions and answering questions. So COVID was something that disrupted. It just came and just put a stop to everything. We work very closely, and this picture would show you where our heart and our work lies, and that's the Anganwadi centers. And the last 2 years have been very difficult because these centers have closed. These beautiful smiles and twinkling eyes have actually disappeared from there. And we've been trying to cope up. We've been trying to understand how to reach out to the requirements, to the necessities of these children, specific to early childhood development in times of COVID. And I would like to bring here today my experience of working with Sangat and other stakeholders on our program, which is called Aspire in Telangana. I will not delve into this particular figure. This is an important figure, but also a very overused figure. And I have just put it as an opening slide to emphasize that while ECD interventions are there across the life cycle, and there are interventions for all age groups, what we felt is important is the first 1,000 days of child's life. This is the period when we all know brain develops most rapidly, from conception till the time 3 years of age. There are close to 1 billion neurons already in the human brain by the time the child is born. Every interaction, every stimulation actually creates more than 1,000 neural connections in the body of the child, and responsive relationships and healthy environments actually help in building sturdy brain, which goes a long way for the child. And hence this becomes the background or the backbone of the Aspire intervention in Telangana, which is the early childhood intervention. And this is how we decided that we will focus on the first 1,000 days to start with, and then we'll see how the intervention goes forward. And hence, picking up from the nourishing care framework, which delineates these 5 specific areas, the 5 specific targeted areas to look at. And this gave us our objectives and opportunities to work within the nourishing care framework. UNICEF has multiple sectors which contribute to early childhood development, and each sector has their specific area of response among the multiple things that they do. And within the first 1,000 days, this is what we identified was the most important area for us to contribute among each of these standpoints, or from each of these pillars. For health, it was preventing and managing illness, to provide evidence-based high-quality care during pregnancy to all infants, and more specifically to infants who are sick or very small. Similarly, nutrition concentrates on optimizing nutritional care during pregnancy, exclusive breastfeeding or breast milk feeding, which became a more important aspect during COVID-19, responsive complementary feeding, and also care for children who are already vulnerable, who are suffering from acute malnutrition. Similarly, for safety and security, which is contributed by our WASH and child protection sectors, we are looking at providing warmth within the household, which includes warmth, emotional as well as physical. We are looking at providing them with good hygiene, enabling environment for the primary caregiver, which is the mother, to be with the infant in the most lovable environment possible, which is safe and secure for the child. Opportunities for early learning. While we misunderstand that this will come in only when the child goes to a preschool or Anganwadi center or school, this is where we are trying to bring in or infuse the aspects of stimulating the child's brain through touch, voice, or simply close contact, which again illuminates the brain development. And then the most important element, which stands on all the 4 pillars that we just spoke of, is the responsive caregiving, is about being aware of the signals that the child is giving, which indicates feeding requirement, which indicates pain, which indicates stress, and how do we respond appropriately to these signals, to these stimuli, to these requirements that the newborn or the child is flagging to us. And hence, on these objectives and opportunities, we created the Early Childhood Development Intervention for Telangana. While these were the objectives very clearly identified, there were certain approaches or certain strategies that we were able to come up with. And for us, and specifically for ECD, we identified that communication becomes an important part. And the communication, which is often misread as a communication only with the client or the beneficiary or to the end user, is something which was not sufficient. Communication needs to stand at every level. So the first level of communication that we're talking about is the communication at the systemic level. In the previous slide, the objectives that we had identified, the sectoral objectives, how do we infuse these with ECD? There's been a lot of work that UNICEF does, which qualifies as an ECD intervention. But then are we really looking at the stimulation aspect? Are we really looking at the responsive parenting aspect? And this is the lens that we started applying to all the work that we do. And this was something that brought in the communication with the system to deliver appropriately the ECD intervention in all aspects of the work that we do. The second area or the second strategy was to convene, advocate, and bring partners together for ECD. If we knew and understand something from COVID, was that we are not enough alone, and we need a lot of voices and we need a lot of force to stand behind this intervention. And hence, we created this multi-partner nutrition alliance, which could stand behind the interventions that we're talking about, which can go and advocate this in entirety, who can speak in one voice about why it is necessary to look at early childhood development as an important area of intervention. And this is where we started making a communication or a dialogue at policy level. And the third area was to strengthen the existing convergence and coordination. In UNICEF, we work very sectorally. We work with specific departments. So health works with health and family welfare, nutrition works with WCD, WASH works with PRI and rural development. When we started talking about ECD, the first area of gap was that which is the convening department. And that's where we identified that, it just cannot be one department or one stakeholder or one operating agency. We need to bring them all together, but then who fixes their accountability? Who holds the decision-making key? Who is responsible for, making sure that things happen as they're planned? And that's where we started advocating around having a center of excellence, having a ECD council at apex level, which directs and engages all these stakeholders and actors who are in field of early childhood development. So this was the easy part. This is where we were able to say that, okay, these are our objectives and these are our strategies, and now we have to start working and moving forward towards our results. And that is where this theory of change model came into being, which talks about the 3 levels of communication. It talks about the 5 angles of the nurturing care framework, and it also gives them the timelines that from this to this we'll do this, and from this to this we'll do this. And this being a very crowded slide, I'll not go into the details of the conceptual framework on how we actually plan to deliver Aspire, and this is a larger communication for another time. We realize that things may not be as in control as we think that they are, and that's when we were ready with our baseline and the intervention and the content. COVID hit us, and all the Anganwadi centers were closed overnight. All the schools were closed. All the communication was closed. The lockdowns were imposed. And that's when we realized that this may not really work. And that's when we decided to take a step back and see what is there, what is available to us in front of our eyes, and how can we move forward from there. And we went back to the drawing board and went back to the beneficiary group who we had already interacted with 6 months back on the various aspects of diet, on security, on stimulation and others, and tried to collect some more information to see where the challenge actually lies. And I'd like to just go through, a couple of slides which talk about these aspects. And just to give a small introduction to this particular aspect, this particular.
Kyati, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just in terms of timing, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just a couple of minutes more, please.
Sure, Gauri. Thank you. So this is something which, brought us into the understanding that where our troubles actually lie. We were able to understand that being the Anganwadi centers being closed, most of the food or the meals that were provided at the Anganwadi center were now being taken to households. These were being consumed by the entire family. And this is something which led to initially an overflow of food consumption, but much later there was a gap that was identified. What we saw and what we understood as a positive point was the support that the primary care providers were getting at the household level. More than 70% who had reported, mothers had reported that they had no support from anybody in the child caring practices were now getting some support. And especially it was heartening to see that fathers were being more interested and more careful about providing child caring support at the household level. The service delivery for nutrition and health were also something which actually improved. So when we say the food provision, now people who were self-selecting, not coming to Anganwadi center, were also receiving THR. So this kind of improved initially, but then the later trends actually show that this was something which created a concern, and if time permits, we can have a discussion around it. Most other services like vaccination, like height and weight measurements remained where they were, not really getting impacted so much because household level service delivery was initiated by the frontline functionaries, and this led to a modality of everybody receiving the services that they were entitled to. What was disheartening to see was the increased evidences of verbal and physical assault among women and among children. This was something that increased over the COVID lockdown period. There were various reasons that we were also able to understand, various attributes that caused this.
I'm really going to have to apologize here, but we've got a very packed schedule and we're the first panel, and I just can't let this panel slip too much. I mean, this particular slide is really startling. But I'm just wondering whether you could just wrap up, please.
Sure, Gauri. I'll just skip ahead to the end. Okay, so I'll move ahead and would just like to mention that this was something that also contributed to how Aspire was developed. We saw that there was more interaction with children, but at the same time, the punitive action also increased. During the lockdown. This led for us to understand how the programming should evolve, and hence the 3 levels of communication that I mentioned initially in our slides. We were able to contribute at policy level. The pictures that you see are the multi-stakeholder advocacy briefs that we were able to put forward on the various aspects of essential service delivery for health and nutrition. At system level, we were able to put forward SOPs for delivering the services more safely. And at the community or the client level, we were able to put forward these digital or audio messages on various thematic aspects. And this was a innovative way of reaching out to the beneficiaries. While this was done in a very campaign mode, but this was something that was very heartening to see, the reach that we were able to see in Telangana. Within a month's time, we were able to reach to 7.5 lakh people through WhatsApp directly with these messages, and through other social media, the reach was actually twofolds of this, not
This is
accounting
really
for.
great,
Yeah,
fantastic, Kyati.
I'm towards
really,
the end, Gauri. I'm coming to an end. Just give me 1 minute.
Yeah, I'm really sorry.
Yeah. So what was really interesting to see was that these kind of messages were able to retain in the minds of the beneficiaries. At the same time, it helped them evoke the level of discussions that we wanted. This evoked questions in their minds, and they were able to go forward and reach out to people and discuss these messages with others. And this led to a creation of the platform which now Aspire is going to stand on, and this is the way forward for us. I really hope that I had more time, but we are building on what you see here in the circle, the C-square IQ. COVID taught us to be responsive towards our programming that helps us move to better coverage, better continuity, better intensity, and better quality. And unless we are able to achieve the entire C-square IQ in a program, we can't really say that we have really succeeded to where we are. And I'll close here, but I'm very happy to take questions if there are any.
Absolutely. Kyati, thank you very much. And I'm really sorry for being a little rude and a bit of a time dragon. But we will definitely come back to this, if we have time now for discussions. Let me now introduce Professor Jonathan Green, a professor of child and adolescent psychiatry at the University of Manchester, also an honorary consultant at the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital. He has led the first randomized controlled trial of a preventative intervention for autism and a post-diagnostic psychosocial intervention trial, both which showed reduction in autism symptom severity. These had been sustained over a long time, so this is really exciting news, that exciting work that Jonathan is involved in. PACT, which is the second intervention, has been widely implemented internationally, but was first adapted in collaboration with Sangath, that tested it for a low-income context using the methodology of task sharing. It is currently being trialed in New Delhi in the Compass project, and I'd like to hand over to Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Gary. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay. It's a great pleasure to contribute to your 25th anniversary in Sangath. And those of you who can see the little thumbnail will see that I'm wearing my celebratory shirt to celebrate Sangath's wonderful achievement, and also over a decade, probably 11 years or so of collaboration that it's been wonderful to have with Sangath, Gary and colleagues on our autism program. So Gary just suggested that I talked about a sort of aspirational idea that we could have now for how we could envisage autism services, both in high income and also low resource settings going forward. And I think one of the guiding principles for me working with Gary and Sangath has been that we should adapt evidence-based practice into low resource settings, but without any compromise of quality or aspiration. Families and children with autism around the world deserve the same. So this proposal really is aspirational everywhere in the world at the moment, but we can work towards it, I think, in our own ways. It's based on the idea that most of our interventions for autism have been very patchy, fragmented, reactive, and often not terribly well evidence-based. And autism is a developmental and enduring condition, and we need a more proactive, developmentally focused pathway, integrated pathway of care, in which we can learn from other enduring health conditions and how health service management has looked after these, thinking about diabetes or hypertension, etc. And when I looked into the different service models for enduring health conditions, there were some key elements that came across that made them successful. One was the patients, the families, if it's a child, looking after, being empowered to care for their own condition, then having good key working and having good stepped care services when necessary. And we're also very interested in the use of digital health technology. So in the chat, for those of you who are interested, I've put the reference to two publications, one in which I put forward this model in general terms, and the other is a paper that we worked on together, Gary and myself and our respective teams, as to how we could look at this within low resource settings. So in principle, we're looking at these different stages. So autism emerges by 3, and we need to look at pre-diagnosis detection and care, what our paper called the detection gap and the care gap, which is much greater in some places than others, but in principle is the same. And we need a stepwise monitoring program for detection, and then pre-diagnosis care. We need family support around the time of diagnosis, then primary intervention after diagnosis, and then an ongoing case management system with step-up care when needed. But generally, we need to empower families and carers to do most of the management in a supported way themselves. So that's really the principle, that it's an integrated and proactive care pathway. And the good thing to say is that we are developing evidence in all these different areas. And so I'll briefly run through this so as not to take too much of your time, but this is essentially the model that we could aspire to. So if we take this first pre-diagnosis section, this is a real problem, as I said, of the detection and care gap. The good news is that we have some good detection instruments now, and we also have some good early care treatments that can make a difference to early autism trajectories. And here are 2 studies that illustrate this, showing the improvement in autism symptom function, reduced severity over time from the end of therapy through until 3. And this is our recent publication where we showed the same thing, but also that we managed to reduce the rates of autism diagnosis by putting in this treatment early on in the 2nd year of life. So there are real opportunities for early detection and preemptive care in this space that we could aspire to. And then around diagnosis, we need good family support and psychoeducation to help them orientate to this new situation as parents, and to guide them through services. And we're developing ways that we could do that, but they need, of course, to be culturally appropriate for the setting. And then the third element is this primary intervention, looking at the core autism processes, how we can best manage those. And luckily, the best evidence we have at the moment for these is through parent-mediated care, which focuses on empowering families to look after these children. And this actually ends up being the best for the children as well. Our PACT trial is one example of this that Gary mentioned, where we put in this intervention preschool after diagnosis in this period here. And then we were able to show a reduction of autism symptom severity, which sustained itself after treatment right through until about 10.5 years. So this is something that we're really intervening in development and making a difference going forward. And this gives, I think, real hope for how we can empower families. And as Gary said too, we have spent a lot of time in wonderful work that Sangath has done with others to adapt the PACT intervention for use in South Asia and through task shifting to non-specialist delivery. And we were able to show in this past trial, which was a well-conducted RCT by India and Pakistan colleagues, that this adaptation in PASS was acceptable, it worked well, and we managed to get good treatment outcomes that were significant. And since then, we've gone on to do the PASS Plus, which has evolved and improved this intervention more for the India setting and tested that more. And as Gary said, we are now involved in a very large scale-up trial, Compass, in Delhi, led by Gary and colleagues in Delhi in Sangath. So it's been a tremendous process to do that work with you in India. And it just leads then into the last phase of this model, which is the longer term support for children and families as they grow through predictable difficulties and transitions in their lives as they grow. And the principle here is that we should have empowered parents and families by this point to do their best for their children growing up and be the best parents they can be, but that we then need to be able to provide step up and step down specialist care for difficulties that arise when we need to. Now, I well recognize that in low resource settings, there's very little of this specialist care, but this is the aspiration that we can work towards. And if our Compass trial is successful, we'll be able to show how what we are thinking of as a disability usher role could really help us empower and look after families through their life course with this disability. Digital technologies can also help, and Sangath has been leading in developing a lot of this digital infrastructure that will enable this kind of program to be effected most efficiently. And with luck, we have a developed proposal to roll this kind of thing out wider in South Asia under Gary and Sangath's leadership there. So in summary, here's an aspirational model. It will take time in all countries around the world to work towards this, but I do think we now have the beginning of an evidence and a theory of change and a logic model to enable us to do this. And this is partly just work that we've done together in collaboration with wonderful colleagues in India. So all credit to you and your work. Good luck going forward. And I look forward to seeing how things develop. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for that summary of this really amazing body of work that you lead. And it's actually my real pleasure that the next thing we're going to present in this panel is going to be a video testimonial from a parent advocate, Sarita Dheer, who just has received the intervention over the last year in Delhi in the Compass project. So if we can have that video, it will be in Hindi. I will then summarize what she said after the video is over. Thank you. Please go ahead.
हेलो एवरीवन, मेरा नाम सरिता धीर है। मेरे बेटे का नाम उत्कर्ष धीर है और वो 9 साल का है। मैं संगत के साथ सितंबर 2019 से जुड़ी हुई हूँ। अभी तक तकरीबन 16 सेशंस हो चुके हैं मैम के, मेरे और उत्कर्ष के साथ। सबसे पहली बार मेरे पास लावांगी मैम और आयशा मैम आए थे, जो कि आशा वर्कर है संगम विहार साउथ ईस्ट दिल्ली से। फिर हर बार सेशन के लिए आयशा मैम ही आते रहे हैं। पहली बार जब मैम मेरे पास आए थे तो मुझे काफ़ी हिचकिचाहट थी ये समझने के लिए कि ये कैसा उपचार है जिसमें खेल की वीडियो भी बनाई जाएगी और उससे उत्कर्ष को क्या फ़ायदा होगा। उत्कर्ष पहले कुछ ज़्यादा बोलता नहीं था। उसे अगर कोई चीज़ चाहिए होती तो वो सिर्फ उस चीज़ का नाम बताने की कोशिश करता, और अगर नाम भी ना पता हो तो सिर्फ पॉइंट करता था, और अगर वो पॉइंट करके भी नहीं बता पाता तो वो उस चीज़ को छोड़कर ही भाग जाता था। यहाँ तक कि उसके खेल में मेरा इन्वॉल्व होना भी उसको कोई खास फर्क नहीं पड़ता था, वो सिर्फ अपने में ही मस्त रहता था। पर ये उपचार शुरू होने के बाद मुझे जैसे जैसे मैम ने बताया कि अगर उत्कर्ष अपनी बात नहीं बता पा रहा है तो उसका भी एक कारण है कि उसको शब्दों की पहचान ही नहीं है। तब मुझे पहली बार ये समझ आया कि उत्कर्ष मुझसे अपनी बात क्यों नहीं बता पा रहा था। फिर धीरे धीरे जैसे जैसे मैम ने तरकीबें मुझे बताई, मैंने वैसे वैसे ही वो तरकीबें की। उससे ये हुआ कि जो बच्चा मुझे अपना खेल खेलते टाइम नोटिस भी नहीं करता था, वो मुझे खुद अपने साथ खेल खेलने के लिए कहने लगा। उसे मेरे साथ अच्छा भी लगने लगा, और वो मेरे साथ खेलता भी बहुत देर तक था। मैंने साफ साफ शब्दों में, छोटे छोटे शब्दों में उसे चीज़ों के नाम बताने शुरू किए। कई बार ऐसा भी हुआ कि जब मैम वीडियो बनाने आते थे तो मैं उत्कर्ष को खेल खेलते टाइम उसको सिखाने में इतना इन्वॉल्व हो जाती थी कि मुझे तरकीबें याद ही नहीं रहती थी। फिर धीरे धीरे मैंने तरकीबों को पढ़ने की बजाय उन्हें समझना शुरू किया। उत्कर्ष के साथ फिर वो मुझे तरकीबें यूज़ करना भी आया। अब उत्कर्ष मुझसे शॉर्ट सेंटेंसेस के साथ साथ थोड़े लॉन्ग सेंटेंसेस में भी बात करने की कोशिश करता है। मैं रोज़ आधा घंटा उसके साथ उसी की पसंद का खेल खेलती हूँ, जिसमें वो सिर्फ अपने ही पसंद का खेल खेलता है, और उसके खेल में सिर्फ मैं अपने शब्दों को जोड़कर बताती रहती हूँ कि वो क्या कर रहा है, और वो सारी बातें सुनता भी है और खेल के दौरान मेरी बातों को दोहराता भी है। अगर इसका मन ना हो कि मैं ना बोलूँ तो वो मुझे कहता भी है कि मम्मा आप नहीं बोलो, मैं बोलूँगा। तो मैं चुप भी हो जाती हूँ। हर सेशन के बाद मैंने एक अच्छा रिजल्ट भी देखा है, और मुझे खुशी है कि मेरा बेटा अपनी बात, अपनी प्रॉब्लम्स, अपनी खुशी और अपना गुस्सा मुझे बता पाता है।
Gauri, you are on mute.
Yeah, just to paraphrase and summarize what Sarita ji has been telling us, she was engaged in the Pass Plus intervention through the Compass project, where she was delivered this intervention by the ASHA worker. And what she described was her initial skepticism when the intervention coordinator introduced her to the ASHA worker, Aisha, especially around an intervention that was focused on play. Her 9-year-old son, Utkarsh, used at that point only gestures and single words to express himself and rarely noticed other people when he was playing. However, as she engaged with the program and the intervention strategies that were shared with her, she started understanding her child's difficulties in communication. Then it took a few sessions for her to orient herself on the how of the past intervention. She began to see this reflected in the changes in Utkarsh, which included an increased confidence in his communication abilities, his newly found confidence in using sentences, and to Sarita ji's delight, he's involving her in play and also being able to share his feelings. In case Sarita ji is in the audience, I would really like her to know how grateful we are that despite her initial doubts and struggles, she chose to place her trust in this intervention. So thank you again for being part of this project. Let me now welcome our next speaker. Mrs. Padmanabhan led Vidya Sagar, a non-governmental organization which was instrumental in supporting capacity building and advancing the cause of childhood disability from their center in Chennai in South India. She has been instrumental in its push to develop systems, not just a program, but larger systems to support inclusive education. Rajal has been a generous collaborator of Sangat, always ready to give us wise and measured counsel when it was needed. Rajal, the stage is yours.
Thank you. First, congratulations, Gauri and the Sangat team and Percy and everyone on 25 years of running this absolutely brilliant organization. It's such a, I think these organizations sort of validate the work that's going on in India. And it's so important that they carry on and we celebrate their major achievements and years. So congratulations, one. Secondly, I don't have a PowerPoint. and I apologize for that. I tried to get a film on, which I wanted very much that you guys see, but that hasn't been possible. I can't, I don't know the technology of showing the film, but some of you might have seen the film Becky. When Percy asked me to speak today, she said, you've got to speak on nudging schools to inclusive education. And I was very excited by it, because that has been my area, that's been my passion, inclusive education. But I keep saying has been, because now at the end of the road, there are so many questions in my mind. When you're working, you're passionate, you just go ahead and do it. But when you have time to reflect, you reflect on a number of things. And actually today, what I'm going to talk about is more questions rather than answers, because I think we need to go further than just talking of the various aspects of inclusive education, of talking about how important it is to include everyone in the same school. Now, having said that, I want to make it very clear that I think no organization anywhere in the world can refuse a person on the basis of disability. I'm very clear about that. But whether I want to promote inclusive education at the cost of the child's happiness is a question I want to ask all of us again. Now, there is nobody can fight inclusiveness. I mean, how can you? It's a philosophical concept which no one can deny, that everyone should be included, everyone should be together, everyone should get the right opportunities. But in reality, it's a very utopian dream. But in reality, if you look at yourselves, if you look at Sangat, if you look at Vidyasagar, if you look at UNICEF, if you look at so many other organizations, we aren't really as inclusive as we claim to be. And that is something which is a reality, which is something that was brought home to me when Tony Booth brought his index to inclusion to Vidyasagar, and we sat and we worked it out. This index to inclusion is a number of questions which actually ask you whether your organization is inclusive of people, not only disability, of people from different castes, different colors, different social economic backgrounds, etc., etc., etc. And I must say, I must pat ourselves on the back, we did rather well. But at the end of the road, when we were actually going through the whole thing, we said, how many people are actually involved? How many disadvantaged people are actually involved in the decision-making program of Vidyasagar? And we came a blunder there. We are not. There are lots of things which actually, make it very difficult for all organizations to be completely inclusive. So when we push inclusion in such a strong manner, we are actually pushing the fact that no organization can actually segregate. That is the main thing. You cannot segregate people. You cannot say, sorry, this child can't pay the fee, so he can't attend school. Sorry, this child has a disability, so he can't attend school. The question is, if he attends school, how does he attend school? That is your basic question, which leads on straight on to the question of access. In India, access is a huge problem. When you talk of autism and you talk about your PACT project, it is the accessibility to areas in So today, when I look at inclusion, I think there are 4 areas which are very important to address. One is advocacy. One is skills leading on to research, because it's all very well to say skills are we give out the skills and therefore we hope inclusion will happen. We need to actually study and see whether inclusive education is actually succeeding or not succeeding. So it's advocacy, skills, research, and finally, how it is implemented in the schools. Because, someone very wisely said that a lot is happening in India. There's so much change happening in India, but the opposite is also true. A lot of change is not happening, and that is India. You've got two elements here. Now, let's start with advocacy. Who is advocating very strongly for inclusive education? Is it the parents? Do we have a parent network that is advocating? I haven't heard of any, actually. Is it the disability activists? Yes, they are raising the question very strongly, but then raising questions in a whole lot of other questions. They're not raising it per se. They're not saying, yes, inclusive education is one area that must happen. Is it the stakeholders themselves? Is there a community of students with disability who's raising the questions of inclusive education? No, I haven't heard of it. So who are the ones who are actually raising it? It is the professionals. It is the professionals who have had special schools, who run special schools, and who are now propagating inclusive education, which is, I have no fight with that, because yes, it is important for someone to take on the role of advocating for inclusive education. But I sometimes wonder, are we reaching the goal of educating the child adequately in either a special school or an inclusive school? If you look at the aim of education, you would say three things: joy of learning. It's a very, very important aspect. Jobs at the end of the road, and maybe higher education or whatever else you would like to do, things like that. Now, if you look at jobs in employment and livelihood, it's only 35. And if you stretch the mark a little more, 40% of people with disabilities have got jobs. And majority of those people are singular disability, which is either blind or deaf. Multiple disability, autism, have not got their jobs as yet. Have they all passed out of school? Well, some have and some haven't. I haven't got a percentage of that, but whether they've done higher education or not, they're probably, again, a very limited number. I haven't got stats on that. Now, if you look at that, then you question yourself. You say, then what am I doing in promoting either special education or inclusive education when both those areas are not adequate enough to get my child educated? As a parent, would I then propagate for one aspect of education over the other? Does a parent have a choice? Not really, because both are inadequate. Your special schools are dismal sometimes. They do not have the robustness of good education. Look at your regular schools where inclusion is possible. They don't have it either. My child went to one of the fancy schools. She went to Rishi Valley. There wasn't a single disabled child in that school. These schools, whether it's Rishi Valley or it's fancier schools all over the country, they have parallel systems which actually look at maybe children from disadvantaged groups or children with disabilities. They are not part and parcel of the school. And that is the tragedy. It is only your SSA and your government which is actually looking at inclusive education in this holistic manner. And though NGOs can poo-poo the government very easily, the government has the skill to actually go down to the last child. Whether they do or not is not the point. But NGOs don't. Let's be very realistic about that. The SSI model of inclusion, the model is very good. It is really good. They're talking of resource centers. They're talking of peripatetic help in the classes. They're talking of neighborhood schools, and they're talking of the percentage of disabled who can be in every class. Now, that's a very realistic thing, because if you look at the percentage of disability in your normal population, it would actually mean that not 1 or 2 in a class at the most. Now, your resource center then becomes a key element of a school. Now, whether it is autism or it's a multiple disability, it is blind or deaf or whatever the disability be, there is a universal design of education. Everyone's got to be educated in the same way, but everyone accesses that differently. Now, that is something that has to be, that is a skill which has to be recognized. You have Braille, you have sign language, you have AAC, you have various other methods of accessing what is actually being taught to you. Now, that is actually a skill which is very, very difficult for most teachers. And therefore, your element of your resource room or resource centers. Now, resource centers don't have to be physical rooms. They can also be a loose network of people who support each other. Now,
Rajul, may I, sorry to interrupt, Rajul, but could I just ask you to wrap up now, please?
Sure.
Thank you so much. Really apologize.
Just one point I want to make again at this point is that I want to propagate that we're talking of adapting curriculums. I am talking of Gandhiji's Nai Talim. I am saying expand the curriculum. Otherwise, your children with low intellectual ability, your children from poor homes are not going to get jobs unless skill training starts right from the beginning. So to end up, I wanted to show a film, but I can't. I believe in inclusive education because you can't fight it. But I think unless we look at the regular skills of the regular teacher and get Nai Talim concepts into our education system, it's going to be difficult for our kids to get jobs at the end of the road. And finally, the economic baseline is a very, very important reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rajul. And again, sorry for interrupting you. I think, you've raised some very, very important questions. And, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have time for a panel. But what I'm really excited about is the next 3 speakers who are going to share the stage are Sweltana Borges, a head teacher of Adarsh Vanita Vidyalay School in South Goa, Jancy Pereira, the special educator, and Maria Genesis de Silva, the manager of schools that Beyond Boundary has worked with. And what I think these schools have done through the program is really set up a resource room. So let's have a few words from them. I do agree that I think the challenges of inclusion on a much larger scale are, really food for thought. It's something that we're all going to have to think about as we go ahead. But can I please hand over to the Adarsh school panel for a few words from them?
And thank part of the
Mrs. Borges, your sound is very distorted. I'm really sorry, but maybe if you switch off your video, we might be able to hear you a little better. Could you try that?
All right. Okay.
Please.
Congratulations.
No, unfortunately, Shweta and Arunima, is the sound better for you?
No, sorry, Genesis, we can't hear you properly.
I'm wondering, Mrs. Borges, whether your Mrs. Pereira or could take over because we cannot hear you at all. It's very like you're underwater.
Okay. Can you?
No, I'm really sorry. The sound is just not adequate.
Okay, I was right next to me.
Mrs. Pereira, are you on a separate line or are you with Mrs. Borges? Are all three of them together in the same room with you, Mrs. Borges? Okay, this is really, really unfortunate, but maybe we could just, maybe you could show us our the slides you've prepared. I think, and maybe I'll try and interpret them for you. I'll try and interpret them for you. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is the resource room. So Beyond Boundaries worked with the other school for at least 3 to 4 years. And in that process, they use what is called the Universal Design for Learning model, which Rajul also addressed and talked about, which is how do we make sure that every child in the class can be an active and joyful learner. Maybe the next slide, please. And what I think the school did and really embraced these techniques within the classroom setting. But what they then realized was the needs of the school were more than just the classroom, what could be done in the classroom. And so the school itself set up the resource room. And I think Ms. Jancy Pereira was really leading that work as the special educator. Could we have the next slide, please? Yes, thank you. So I think this is the resource room. Next slide, please. And so I think what happens within the context of the school, I don't directly work with the program, so I'm going to be speculating a little bit, is the children who are struggling in the mainstream classrooms actually have special sessions with the special educators and the resource room teachers for certain timings in the day, when they can then go back to the mainstream classroom for most of their work. Next slide, please. And you can see that the school really embraced this idea fully. And I want to give credit really where it's due, because often special educators, head teachers might see the value. But I think one of the main people that you cannot do anything like this within a school unless you have management support. And so I really have to say that Adarsh School and Mrs. De Silva have really been the lead in actually supporting the idea of a resource room, convincing management committees as well as parents that this is not something to be stigmatized, but something to be embraced, because it's going to help your child. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide, please.
That was the last one, Gauri.
Okay. So I really have to apologize to the teachers, the head teacher, and the special educator of other school that we could not really bring your presentation on board because of the very unfortunate quality of the sound. I want to really thank my panelists on this particular panel. I think they've given us a really interesting view of what we need to do in the community for all our children. What can we do when we find children who have special needs? How do we support them in the context of the early years with a specific disability driven intervention, something which is specific for a disability? And finally, how do we get school systems inclusive? But I think Rajul left us with some very important questions that, of course, we want an inclusive society, but at the end of the day, particularly with respect to schooling, who does that benefit the most? And how do we make that learning experience really valuable for the children themselves, so that when they come through, they have something very positive and something they can take into adulthood in a very useful way. I am going to apologize to my panelists now, but unfortunately, we are 10 minutes over time, and I can see the next panel members have already arrived. So thank you very much again, Kyati Tiwari, who I think unfortunately had to leave, Professor Jonathan Green, Rajul Padmanabhan, and all our representatives from the other school. And of course, mostly Sarita ji, Dheer, who gave us the video testimonial. Thank you very much. Our collaborators and our community partners are really one of the key reasons why Sangat has made it to 25 years. So thank you very much.